What's the easiest, fastest, sturdiest, and most attractive way to start a crochet project when working in rounds? I'm going to compare 3 ways of doing a starting ring. 2 of the methods you've seen before, the third is brand new. So what are the pros and cons of magic circles, chain stitch rings, and floating rings, and why does it matter which one you use? As a side note, I actually invented the floating ring method, but I'm going to put bias aside and give you my honest opinion about these 3 techniques. I know you might already have your favorite, but if you sometimes wonder where you're going about things in the best way possible, then have a peek over the fence to see if your current habits are actually the best fit for your projects. So which starting ring is the easiest? Let's start with the one that you surely know how to do already, the chain ring. Obviously, this method has been around for a long time and uses techniques and stitches that you already know how to do. On the downside, the slip stitch can be a little bit fiddly, and if you are making a very small ring, then it can be hard to see where to insert your hook. Now let's do a magic circle. Magic circles get a bad rap because it can be fiddly and a lot of people just can't get their head around how to make them. It also has a lot of steps involved to make just one. But your skill in making magic circles can improve with practice. Another plus is it's easier to see where to insert the hook than with the chain ring method, but it can be awkward crocheting into a big floppy ring. And now for floating rings. This is a technique I developed as part of my Breakaway Crochet Method, which sets out a way to crochet motifs continuously as if you were working a back and forth type of stitch. So I admit there's also a learning curve here. It can be fiddly like the magic circle, but there are a couple of hacks to make it easier that I hope to show you in a future video. Also, when you're learning to make floating rings, it can sometimes be hard to see or to know where to insert the hook. On the plus side, you will always be making the center ring and the first stitch simultaneously. And like the magic circle, your proficiency will improve with practice. So I'd say the easiest method is the chain ring, with magic circles and floating rings tied for second place. But again, the more you practice, the easier things get, and getting the hang of them will be well worth your effort. So which version is the quickest to do? Let's find out. I've done a very scientific test where I'll try to work at a natural speed as if I would in real life, although it might be a little bit different for you. The clear winner here is the floating ring, followed by the magic circle, and the chain ring comes in third on about 18 seconds. So what are the time eaters? For the chain ring, I factored in making the slip knot here because that's a requirement for every one you make and that's what slows it down. The slip stitch can sometimes be fiddly and it can take a moment to find the center of the ring. For magic circles, you have a lot of maneuvers and it might take more than one try to make each one. And you have the added step of tightening the ring later on. For floating rings, you might need more than one try to get one made if you're a beginner, and it might take a moment to find the center of the ring. However, each version has something that is quick to do. For example, chain rings, the chain itself is easy to do. The magic circle doesn't require a slip knot, and with floating rings, the ring and the first stitch of the round are done in one operation, and they don't need slip knots. So it's obvious that the quicker you can work a center ring, the better. But here's a fun fact. If we used each version for the exact same project, let's say a baby blanket that has 99 squares, it would take an additional 12 minutes to complete the project using magic rings and an additional 60 minutes 30 seconds if using chain rings. You put so much work into a project, but there's always the dread of your items falling apart through wear and tear or laundering. It seems a lot of people are reluctant to use magic circles because they seem especially prone to unraveling. This makes sense because there are 2 yarn tails for every motif, and on top of that, if you cut the ring's yarn tail too short or do not securely weave it in, then the ring can fall apart. Also, when you're cinching the ring together, if you pull the yarn tail too hard, it can break. As they are traditionally used, I think the same thing goes for the chain ring method. Each motif has 2 yarn tails, and the first yarn tail is very much involved in the beginning slip knot and must also be woven in very well to avoid unraveling. You also have to be careful to make the slip stitch in a very secure way. Floating rings are a whole new story as far as yarn tails are concerned. By their nature, floating rings allow you to work every motif continuously with one length of yarn for an entire project. So all motifs in a project, except for the very first one, have absolutely 0 yarn tails. This means that every floating ring in a project has as much likelihood of unraveling as any other stitch. Something you might not know is that it's possible to work continuously using the chain ring method, which is good news as far as durability is concerned, but unless you really understand the concept behind doing this, you will have to search for projects that have this technique specifically explained in the written instructions. So to summarize, in terms of durability, magic circles are the riskiest choice. Likewise, it can be risky to use the chain ring method unless you use them to work continuous motifs, but be prepared to take a hit as far as the appearance of some of the stitches go. And because of the total elimination of yarn tails, your best bet with durability is to work continuous motifs and floating rings. Putting all the other issues aside, we want our projects to look as good as possible. So which type of center ring looks the best? Magic circles are great because you can tighten the ring as much as you want, no matter how many stitches you squeeze in for the first round. So this is a really good choice for amigurumi projects. But you also have to be careful about securing the yarn tail so the ring doesn't fall apart. The chain ring method will also give you a nice tight ring that is pretty much guaranteed not to stretch later on, and you can make it any size you want, which works really well for just about any project. Floating rings can give you a nice tight center, but if you're a beginner, it takes some practice to get the size right. With multiple round motifs, the ring can also stretch as you're working, but you also have the ability to tighten the ring as you do for magic circles. Once the motif is finished, the ring will not stretch. Also, the type of starting ring you use affects how you work the first stitch of each round. For example, if you start with a magic circle or a chain ring, you have to substitute the first stitch of each round with chain stitches. While this works out pretty well, there's a subtle difference in the appearance of the first stitch as compared to the other stitches in the round. But of course you won't have this issue if we're working in spiral rounds. However, with floating rings, you don't work chains as a substitute for the first stitch on new rounds. What you do instead is make yarn overs and pull through those, just like you would for a regular stitch. You really can't tell the difference between the first stitch and the others in the round. The ins and outs for this technique are well beyond the scope of this video, but I'm always adding new tutorials to my YouTube channel to help you master these techniques. So I hope this was interesting and gave you some inspiration to try some new things that you haven't thought of before. And the upshot here is that I won't really pick an overall winner. Instead, I'll suggest the best way to use each one in a given situation. For example, I would always recommend magic circles for amigurumi projects where you really do need the ring to be very tight, and for any other project where you will only have to make a few rings, such as beanies and doilies. And here's a secret. You don't always have to use a magic circle even if the pattern tells you to. You can pretty much always substitute chain rings for magic circles if that makes it easier for you. With chain rings, they are the all-purpose ring that can be used for just about any project. They are very straightforward to make and can be made any size you want. You also have the option of working continuous motifs with chain rings, which can spare you all the yarn tails, but there will be a trade-off in terms of extra steps to do and with the appearance of some of the stitches. Although you can also use floating rings for most projects, you really get a lot of bang for your effort when you use them for single color, multiple motif projects. Once you learn how to make them, you'll save a tremendous amount of time and all of your stitches will have the best appearance. You'll also have the peace of mind that the rings won't unravel and there's no sewing or yarn tails to fuss with at the end of a project. So learning new techniques opens the door to the creation of unique and fresh designs. Let me know which method you like the best and why it suits you. And as always, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.